while Joel sets up the video, I think he's setting up a video, making sure it's recording. We're going to videotape this, or record it. It's not really videotaping, right? It's recording. That's the new cool word. We're recording this session because we are going to cover the topic of classroom management today. And we have a handful of distance student teachers that we want to make sure that we get this down for them, and that our hopes is to share it with them. So hi, so they can watch it and get the same information. Does that make sense? Okay. So today we asked you to show up having read this article last night. We asked you to breeze through it and to look at the 7 insights that the author discusses. You have a hard copy in front of you. So let me hold that up. The hard copy is right here. And so the rest of the articles you will not need right now. You will reference them later, but this is the article we want you to think about and reference right now. So our first activity to begin is to think about this image on the board, and that image is what is in the center of the first page of the article. And we want you to turn to a partner, if possible, someone that's the same grade level, like either elementary, middle, high school, and discuss how this image relates to what you read last night. So think about this image and the article and discuss how this image relates to what you read last night, or maybe you read it right before you walked in here, I don't know.
And there's no wrong answers.
There's no wrong
Kind of
answer.
brainstorming.
So turn to a partner, or if you just want to do with how you're sitting right now, that's totally fine. Okay? Give you a few minutes to discuss, and then we'll share out. Go ahead.
Because the first one I saw, I was like, oh, it's like a hybrid.
Or do you want to like?
Sorry.
For me, say what you put in. Is a seed.
Yeah. To show them that you care about them.
And I'm going to go ahead and say that the blossoming flower probably indicates
You have to strike that out.
and how certain conditions perhaps can help a flower grow better than other conditions. And I think this article is kind of getting at the conditions or the ways that you can set an environment that this will grow.
And I like literally stuff class. Yeah.
That's what I was
Yeah,
saying,
maybe we
like-
should put in. And then like
That one, I see that in this one. And they're just speech bubbles.
That's what I was thinking, like,
I also like how like
Either a speech bubble or a thought
kind of
bubble.
like not.
Yeah.
It's not like a conversation. It's not like.
I guess it's like a foundation, like, schooling, like, there's something
I really like this read. I got the exact they said something about warm and half full. I know, I was like, well, that's what I want.
Doesn't it say a lot?
You can more clearly see that one flower's like clearly behind and it's not blossoming. I think that's like a pretty clear,
Have to hold students accountable.
like, I think it's a pretty clear sign that we're not supposed to leave our students behind unless they not blossom.
I mean, as like
Their students, I think that's
And, and you know, student teachers are afraid about their
Okay.
relationship, but it doesn't.
If we can regroup, and we are going to share out some of the ideas that you came up with. Who would like to go first?
I really like how it's a flower, but then the one on the left, I might be looking too much into it, but I like how it doesn't really like kind of say what flower it is. It's not the same one. It's kind of like you're giving it and like building it into its own different thing because you don't really know what it could be. But I kind of like how it's not just like the exact same thing, just like a little bit smaller. I don't know. That's just what I thought.
Good.
We discussed how the whole image is in a speech bubble, which in this article talks a lot about language and like using a lot of positive reinforcement, and you're gonna have to talk to students in different ways and ways to really focus on their best potential and all that.
the, sorry, the flower on the left, looked to be, we couldn't really tell on the printed version, but in the photo on the screen, it looks like it's farther behind, and so we thought that might literally be a sign that it hasn't blossomed the way the flower in front is, and so sort of the literal meaning of not leaving certain students behind.
I kind of thought of it as like, in my head, I see the bottom is like dirt kind of. And so in my head, I was like, well, maybe that's like the foundation and the basis of like building relationships with your students. And then it can help them like bloom and blossom into like their own little being, their own person. Just as I see it.
We talked about the idea that both the flowers might be different students and that each student is an individual. And so what one student may need to hear in terms of feeling and management is going to be different from another student.
I talked about how it depicts that a student is a seed or flower which you plant, and you have to give the plant adequate sunlight, water, oxygen, and keep them in balance. Not if you give it too much, it's gonna die. If you don't give it at all, it dies. So in order for the seed to blossom into a pretty flower or a pretty student or whatever, you have to keep the right balance of all the components.
So you kind of thought of this as the teacher and the student kind of thing, this are
Both of
grown,
them are
this is a grown
students.
student.
Both of them are students, yeah.
Yeah. That, when I looked at it, I thought about totally different. I thought of this as a teacher that's a model for the student, you know, and this teacher has been there, and so we have to be that for our kids. That's kind of different. I didn't even think when you guys started saying both students.
Yeah, I was thinking of students being in their own, on their own journey of growth, right? That some are more developed, some are just blossoming, some might just be a single little bud, but.
So Diane found this article, and it's by, why don't you tell them a little bit about Carol Tomlinson?
Well, has anybody heard of Caroline Thomas? Hey, Dave. Go ahead.
I suppose she's the differentiation.
Yeah, she's the inspiration, the creator, who came up with the concept of differentiation. So you can imagine how widely known she is in education circles today, because it's become a very huge part of our everyday teaching, and it needs to be, and it's really made a difference, I believe. We've seen years with that. Joel and I, and Cheryl probably, we're just, Dean, we're older than you. And so we've seen times before that there was ever such a thing, and I think we did do some things, but now we know so much more about it, you know, and it's been very helpful.
It's kind of just in the special ed world.
Yes, it was.
And now it's been
Yeah.
brought into the regular ed world, is my observation.
It's very true.
Okay.
Awesome. We're going to transition now for you to use this graphic organizer. So what Joel has done is he put headings based on the different insights that Tomlinson discusses in the article. And what we want you to do is we want you to, in those circles with a partner, detail specific examples, phrases, scenarios from your classroom that you're experiencing that would go in those different areas. Does that make sense? So as you read this article, maybe you were thinking of certain students or experiences that you've had or insights that you've gained. Those would go in those bubbles. We'd like you to work with a partner.
And just ignore the back.
And ignore the back. Yeah, we'd like you to work with a partner, but you can write different things down, okay, depending on your own experiences. Any questions on what we're gonna have you do for the next 5 to 10 minutes? And if you need to refer back to the article, you can. Yeah, so don't do the central focus yet, right? We'll do that
I
later.
really like.
Yep, don't do the central focus yet, we'll discuss that after we share out.
Yeah, I think it's like an example. So teach well, create engagement.
You can come to your
You're
partner.
good.
just did
I know.
Well,
I
so
don't
give it a-
say,
Yeah, give it
I
a
told
video.
$5
what they could.
Did you really?
I said I'm not gonna say it.
Yeah. I will improve, I will improve.
It's not really YouTube.
Yeah.
It's mostly the behavior of why.
Something I.
Yeah, we do.
Should we go back to this one?
Yeah.
So as you guys do that, once you're done filling in the bubbles, your electronic copy didn't have attached to it the last page of the article.
No, it
Your
didn't.
printed copy does. So once you're done, and it's kind of these snippets from teachers about students they've had, go ahead and take a look at that last page after you're done filling in the bubbles, and look at those really interesting, like, visions from teachers. I think they're really insightful. Go back to talking outside.
So I think we each went to, I believe so.
No, so it could be about people, it don't have to be from us.
I think it can be either something you witnessed your class
Oh,
teacher do or
okay,
something
that's
you
why
done.
it's so hard.
Oh, okay.
I have to say this one myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
That's like I thought.
So it's really good.
It's like, do you have an example? Or like a time or like a conversation?
Oh, okay. So I mean, sorry, that's how funny it is. They, I'm trying to remember what they were, they were in music. Came back and I was like, I'm so tired. And so we started falling asleep, concentrating. It was so because that and our reference, we didn't get a chance to finish our lesson. So they were essentially, they didn't get a chance to make a meeting that came in session.
I'm like, I can tell they weren't
I had to have a spot.
Like, it was actually like,
And it was more of a general, like, okay.
there's a few that
And I'm
usually
calling it out.
There was like one where I was like, back to
So I hope it's okay. I know that I was like, okay, great class.
It's kind of like, I know like I thought like now it's like being in this like it's so hard. Like be okay with this like tiling.
We could also sort of
So easy to like get lost in
because I can be so like yesterday, I was in a class and we had one student like got done with something. You know, just did not come on. Like I realized before we even did it, like ourselves or whatever, and so basically I really respect that you're trying to participate, but I'm gonna you know, like you raise your hand because you're being disrespectful. And then he raised his hand the entire rest of class. No problem at all.
Hey, try to move through your boxes or your circles, I'm sorry, your circles as best as you can.
And it, you know, if you don't get something in every circle, that's okay, but
Yeah.
things that stick out to you.
Like we're gonna have fun, but like when it's time to get serious, like since our
Does anyone
priorities,
else
we're
have
gonna learn.
a circle that sticks out?
That's what we want. So that's what we-
something that's like.
A lot cussing around.
These taste a lot like my in-laws recipe.
I was so proud of that kid. I was like, let's go. Usually it's
And the teacher was really like, yes, that I looked, you know, some people just like,
I couldn't like actively get doing it because I was but that's a my class. Like, I say thank you.
And then you go ahead and you do a couple things.
Yeah, eye contact.
so right.
Eye contact and praise are like two things.
Which way they're going, are they gonna be up, are they gonna be flat, are they gonna be crunchy, are they
I always know,
I just don't
you
care
know
for
what you're
that.
not supposed to.
Consistency.
The little snippets of things I hear.
Yeah,
And you just see them on a regular
whenever
basis, and I see
I
how.
had to like really
This is where I'm at, like,
follow the
refrigeration. Do you refrigerate your dough?
You do hear like
Or like
little
temperature
tidbits.
your eggs and your butter?
And this kid is going through a lot. And she drew the picture, they supposed to draw pictures.
I think for me, it's like, this is
So you got it down.
I'm old, and once again, I drew the
like,
I need to.
yeah, like for me, it's like, cause like it's been so wildly inconsistent for me, where like today was like, I was like, hey dude, like this is so good, but then like this day's like yesterday where I was like, what am I doing? Like I think for me, it's like, it's gonna take time, it's still a confusing concept for them, and we're still teachers, and I don't quite get what that means, and try to more than that.
Okay, so why don't all of you just take a second and read from those four, kind of snippets from teachers on your printed copy, things that they saw in relation to this, all of these insights.
What book did you want us to read?
Okay.
I have this language
So for some reason, the online version of this from the publisher cuts off that last story. And we've searched, we can't find the rest of it, so. But you kinda know
You
what,
figure it out.
what's
You
gonna
can
happen.
figure it
And by the way, distant student teachers, we will be sending you packets of this information as well, so wait with bated breath.
the ones that you just read, those are 4 examples, well, 3.5. Can you, the headings give it away, but can you accurately pinpoint which insight each one of those stories highlights from the article? Or maybe it's multiple? So let's look at the first one, the power of perception.
Which bubble does that one fit into?
Finding students' redeeming characteristics for sure, I would say.
Any others?
Show respect for every student.
Could it also be like teaching well? That the way students respond in one class might be different than another teacher's class based on the teaching that's taking place? And the relationships that have been built? How about different circumstances, different student?
That goes under teach well. If you have interactive activities incorporated in education, that's gonna go a lot better for students.
You had a great example of that today with the Smash Math. Do you want to give a little synopsis of what you did?
Sure, so my students are very active, and love to mess with things in the classroom, so I decided to do a really hands-on project for math. So it's called Smash Subtraction, so they each get Play-Doh. Let's say it's like 7 minus 3, they make 7 balls of Play-Doh and smash 3 of them. So it's very visual, very kinesthetic. All the kids were very engaged and very into it. It actually worked out really well.
Every single child in that room did the math. All of them. Some of them did the entire worksheet because they were excited about smashing the Play-Doh. And for 2nd graders, right after recess, that might have a lot of energy, haven't eaten lunch yet, I don't know. It's just they have a chance to use their kinesthetic energy to do math. And know your students well. If your students need that, then create activities like that. How about find out the real story? I have lots of experiences with this, where you think a kid's just misbehaving or being disruptive for a certain reason, or you take it personally, when then you realize, don't take it personally. It really has nothing to do with you, it has a lot to do with things that are going on in their personal lives, right?
And I was talking, I think it's with Jessica and Casey, there's 100 reasons why kids can be off, or there's things going on. Some of them are just that particular day, right? But some of them are like global to their lives, and there are reasons behind it. And you don't realize until you've been in it a while the power of positive with kids. You might be the best thing in their day, the best thing in their life, and that's a pretty heavy challenge, but it's true.
And to find ways that if they are encountering challenges at school or at home, to find ways to help them and advocate for them, right? So if you know that a student in 10th grade has to wait for the check, go cash it, get to the grocery store, buy the food, and get to class, what are some accommodations you can make for that student? If you know that every Monday that student's not going to show up till 10 o'clock, or 11 o'clock that day, what are some accommodations individual teachers or the school can do for that student?
You can meet him after school to catch up with the missed work.
Fantastic. So keep things organized. You know every Monday that student will not be there the first 3 periods of the day. Get all that work, spend time with them after school, possibly send it home with them on Friday, knowing that they're not going to be school on Monday. You are going to encounter this with students who spend their nights at different parents' or guardians' houses. So whether that means access to technology, having double sets of textbooks, whatever it might be, they might go into mom's house and dad's house, or maybe it's aunt's house or grandma's house. They might have different rules at those houses. You have to remember, you cannot penalize a student for what their life circumstances outside of school, right?
And I would also say this, you can't do it in every situation, but you can try really hard to make this kid is a part of a unit that is a family. And sometimes, many times, most of the time, I would say, the families are struggling for reasons that's outside of their control. And if all of a sudden the parents realize that you are not their punisher, but their advocate, and you want to work with them, things turn around not only for that child in your classroom, but turn around for the whole family. And again, I say this all the time, it's kind of cliche, but we're changing the world as teachers. And that's just an example, it's really true.
Good. If we can turn back to your graphic organizer, we want to share out some ideas that you had. We'll just go around, and then what our hope is by the end of the discussion, we'll spend probably 10 minutes doing this, by the end of the discussion, we're gonna try to meet in the middle, okay? So rather than starting in the center and brainstorming out, we're brainstorming out to figure out what is that central focus? What does this all revolve around, okay? Does anyone have Teach Well? Examples of Teach Well, insights, Teach Well? Supervisors, if you have some examples, feel free. Oh, you have one? Okay, great.
We have keep them engaged, provide clear directions, and be flexible.
Make sure you have smooth transitions. We've been talking a lot about that, right? Because if you have a lot of just downtime, things are gonna happen that you don't want to happen, right? So smooth transitions, clear directions, clear routines.
Okay, mine was well-planned lessons, and then you have to have various levels of material that will satisfy the goal. I might have three or four different levels of reading skill in the class. I need to have a variety of reading materials that would satisfy the needs of each one of those students.
It even comes down to how are you distributing the papers, right? So are you gonna have them on the desk when the students arrive?
Oh, yeah.
Or when they're turning them in, are you gonna have them hold them up? Are you gonna have them all go and turn them into a bin where then chaos can possibly ensue, right? You have to figure those things out for what's gonna work for your different groups of students. And for your students, because it might be different from one class to the next. Or one time of the day versus the other time of the day, right?
You really need to anticipate. Some of you are doing that, I'm sure already, many of you already, but anticipate what might these problems be, so I have to figure out a procedure for this.
And that's
And
where
we get
like,
better and better.
yeah, your instant reflections, right? Teachers reflect on the go. So if you say, ooh, that didn't go so well, I need to remember later on the day when I have them turn in papers, I need to do it this way instead. Or that tomorrow when I do this part of the lesson, I need to quickly change this up. High school teachers get the benefit of like repeating that lesson maybe 2, 3, 4 times a day. So they can instantly change it. The next 50 minutes students come in. And so by the end of the day, you've taught that lesson 3 or 4 times, you get pretty good at it, right? But you have to constantly reflect.
So we learn from our mistakes, right? So what we're saying is, elementary teachers, you might not be able to experiment with them until the next day, but from the mistakes that you make, high schools, they get to do the very
We
next
get to do it
period,
right away.
right? But it's
Right
about
away.
the mistakes we make and what we learn from them as teachers.
How about the next bubble of other? Oh no, not other. Let's go. Help student to act on their own behalf. Any ideas?
I think something, I mean, like for me, I put down like a direct example. I've been having a lot of discipline issues with the class and it's been across like specials and the like. And I hated to like single out students, but I was like, hey, if you're a student and you know you're doing what you need to do, remember this class is a team. And if somebody's off track, you just go like, hey, come on, we gotta listen to what they're saying up there. And it was really cool today. One of my students came back from music and he was like, yeah, somebody in our class was goofing off in front of the class with the teacher there. And he said, I walked up, I told him to come sit down next to me. It was really cool for me. I was like, nice. But he's a really quiet kid, so it was really cool for me to like hear that. Yeah.
Some things I hear you say is identifying behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Identifying the behaviors that want to be corrected and also the positive behaviors. And
Yeah.
we have a sheet in the back of the packet, don't look at it yet, it's a surprise. But identifying those behaviors and being very clear about it. I was in Carly's classroom today and she did a really nice job of identifying positive behaviors and like actually giving details. I really loved how you helped your buddy and tied his shoe for him. I mean, there was a kid that bent down and tied another. It wasn't just, I really love how you were kind, right? Or you were respectful, but you identified a positive behavior and you were clear so they could hear it. reinforces that behavior, right?
Across the room.
Across the room.
I also think about this one, help students to act on their own behalf. To me, that's like making sure each child has a voice. Like what they say and what they do matters. And sometimes that takes a while to get to that. But they need to feel empowered to advocate for themselves.
I think sometimes kids who, you have to do an individual behavior plan for, you know, to get them to take ownership so they can make some of those decisions themselves. I think that's a powerful strategy. You kind of, Cheyenne, can you, just the young man that came up to you and asked you to go for, that kind of fits there, doesn't it?
So we had some discipline in some other classroom, the science classroom, we had a discipline issue, and then the kid, we had this with the kid before, where I hold his hand and walk him around the school, and he kind of tells me what's wrong and what happens, so I let him through it. And today, although I didn't go to him, I knew he was having a bad day, but I didn't go to him and ask him what's wrong. He came to me and he was like, let's take a walk. And he held his hand, I was like, let's take a walk. And then we
Yeah,
did
that's an
something.
example. Good. And even teaching your young ones, or even the older students, you know, the ones that are struggling, right? The ones that might take a little bit longer to work on that math problem or to get through that worksheet, to teach them ways to work through it before you can get to them, right? Because when you have so many students, it's really hard to give them each that attention right away. But to figure out ways, rather than them start ripping the sheet or doing things or bugging their neighbor, right? Giving them things to do or to think about prior to you getting to them. And also you being very conscious that maybe those are the students you need to make sure that you get to first to give them some of those strategies to work through some of the things that they're encountering.
That really overlaps with teaching well.
Yeah,
because
teaching
if you
well.
teach them those strategies,
Mhm.
then they'll have something to fall back on.
Let's go up to show respect for every student.
We talked about, one way that you can really show respect for your students is be engaged in their interests, even if they're not your own. It's just exciting for kids to know that their teacher is excited about the same things, whether it be like, oh, this new movie came out, or I love Spider-Man, or just something that allows you to engage with them on a deeper level. And like my kids are really into superheroes, so on Friday we're doing a Spider-Man themed worksheet. Just like super simple thing like that can show that you're interested in them. And so continuing with that, it's easier with older kids because they have probably more interests that are more related to you.
I think this ties directly to Teach Well, especially in the article it talks about creating relevant lessons for them, and I think that's across the board. So that really goes, that really seeps really nicely into culturally responsive pedagogy in terms of being responsive to your students' cultures, interests, backgrounds, academic abilities, right? Bringing their interests into the classroom. I've told this story last year when I spoke to, last year Joel invited me to speak to all the student teachers before I worked here. And I talked about being culturally responsive and what that meant in my own high school classroom, but then also examples from my own children's elementary classroom. My kids had a first and second grade teacher that every single week they had a top dog of the week, and that student got to pick the topic of study. So whether it was turtles, buildings, my daughter picked unicorns, I think my son picked fish, there were sharks. That entire week, most of the lessons of math, science, reading, writing, all revolved around that one student's choice for the week.
Wow, great.
Talk about being engaging and relevant, allowing that student to be empowered. My kid's teacher figured out enough things to do around unicorns. I mean, they used clay, they did it with art, music, drama, writing stories, mythology. It was incredible. Architecture they built, it was incredible. So you can do it. You can do it. You can do it in the high school classroom. You can do it in elementary, middle school classroom.
And there's a perfect place for that interest inventory at the beginning of the year. It's
Yes.
important too, you gotta know.
You gotta know. Another thing in terms of showing respect for every student, we talk about relationships and relationship building and how important that is. That is really the foundation, right? Is building mutual respect with your students. And one way to do that is to get to know them. And so you elementary teachers might have all day with those students, but for the high school or for music, you might see them just for 45, 50 minutes a day, or every other day, depending on block schedule. And so how do you make those connections? How do you forge those connections? That means you're standing outside the classroom, you're shaking their hand when they come in, you greet them by name, when you see them in the hallway, you talk to them, you ask them how their football game went, or how their music performance went, or hey, did you catch America's Got Talent? Oh, I love those new shoes, I didn't see you wear them yesterday. Okay, all of these things, right? You might have 150 to 180 students or more a day that you see, but to keep track of those and to try to make sure that you make those connections every single day. Not with every single student, but that you know that every period you're gonna try to make a connection with 5 students and talk to them about something personal, engaging. Then the next period, do it with the next 5 students, next 5 students. And especially if you see one that's a little off, you definitely make sure to hit on them. Does that make sense?
That reminds me of that video, and those of you that had me for School and Society, it's called Truly, A Truly Amazing Teacher. Anybody remember that? Carly, you remember that? About the teacher, Mr. Wright from Louisville, from Yale High School. Just Google that sometime, it's exactly what Kristen was just talking about. Because not only do you need to know what their interests are and have them open up to you, you need to open up to them about who you are, so that they know you're a real person.
Yes. A lot of our students don't think that we're real people. My own sister was a student at the school that I taught at my first 2 years. And I would tell her about the TV shows my colleagues, the other English teachers, and I liked to watch. And the places we went out to eat and things we did on the weekend. And she, no joke, said out loud to me on the way to school one day, she goes, oh wait, Mrs. Miller's like a real person? And I was like, I'm your sister, I'm a real person, I have a personal life, I have social things that I do and things outside of teaching. She goes, yeah, but I just didn't think my other teachers were like that. They see you only as a teacher, right? They don't see you as a real human being. When you open up and share a part of yourself with them, it makes them open up and share a part of themselves with you, because they're not just your students, right? They're human beings with their own lives and their own challenges and successes that they're having, and you need to recognize those.
And if you're a primary teacher, I almost will guarantee that at some point in your career, a child will be amazed that you don't sleep at school.
Yeah.
Hey, junior high, I thought, I had some kids who thought I slept at, so I was in one of the cottages out there. I
The
thought that was your
Lombard
house.
cottage.
I thought that was your house.
You're always there, the car's always there.
Let's do one more.
How about the warm demand? I'm kind of curious about the warm demand, because what does that mean to you?
Yeah, what does that mean?
It's my favorite 2 words in the whole article.
Me and Noah talked about how in an elementary classroom we go to there with the students, like we can do all the Fortnite dances you want, we can dab, we can floss, we can do whatever you want, but when we are working, we are working. We'll joke in the morning, I'll joke around with you, I'll push you around and smile at you, but when we're working, I'm not fist bumping you when we're doing a worksheet or when there's instruction happening, we are working, like that sort of thing.
Others? Casey?
We talked about like following through with the expectations and rules that you set in the classroom. So even if it's hard, even if you don't necessarily want to be like, this behavior needs to stop, you just do it and they will get it. You just gotta give them the time.
Good.
I know students model positive behavior. We have a really hard time in the hallways, like shoving each other, biting each other, licking each other, rolling somersaults. My students don't know how to line up very well. And so rather than always constantly saying like, we walk in the hallways, we don't crawl in the hallways, they're just showing them like, all right, let's have these 2 students show us how we're supposed to do it. And so these 3 students, they get to be the examples, which is exciting for them. Will show us how to walk in hallways, which sounds ridiculous, like kids should know how to do that, but they don't.
And if you choose the kid that's like the most antsy and the most difficult to show the rules, oh my gosh.
That's a great decision.
It is, it is. You ask them to be the leader and you see a whole different change. I also love that, think about this. Now when we walk in, we're gonna be quiet and not touch each other, versus when we enter the school, I would really appreciate if you walk in quietly and keep your hands to yourself. Do you see the difference in tone, in respect that I'm giving my students based on the language I just used? Now friends, I would love it if right now you took out your pencil, your piece of paper, and opened your book to page 5 versus take out your pencil, paper, and stop touching Johnny over there, right?
So a couple years ago, we were having this discussion in forum and, or in seminar, and we talked about the concept of a democratic classroom. And one of our teachers, student taught up in Rova, really kind of came up with an interesting point. She said, classrooms really can't be democracies. They're more like republics. And the teacher has been elected to make the rules and be just and take input from the people. But if everybody has a voice and everybody gets, it's turns into chaos. It's not really a democracy. It's more a republic with the teacher being leader.
What we got to is student choice is very empowering, but there are lots of places you can use student choice. But you are the decider for the things that you need to decide. You have to be not be afraid to be the decider for things that you just know more.
Yeah, been
You
there,
know more
done
than
that.
they do about
Really
that.
goes right back to what Cheyenne started with.
Yeah.
One more thing I want to talk about the warm demander, and I think this is especially important for maybe for the little ones too, the little friends, but our older friends that might challenge you in ways for middle school and high school, that might use language, that might have some physical aggression towards you, that you might take it extremely personally because they seem like they're adults in their physical stature, but actually it might have nothing to do with you. I think being a warm demander, going off of what Cheyenne said, is like, when we're learning, right? Like I can be your friend in terms of, respecting you and treating you as a human being, but at the same time, you need to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in our classroom as a student, right? Not letting behavior set you off, because one student's behavior, and I made this mistake my first year's teaching. When a student did something in class that made me really flustered and upset, I made the mistake of making that affect me the rest of the day. So that was a disservice to the rest of my students. So what I realized was identifying the behavior, asking the student to stop, then moving on, right? But not making that whatever that feeling that they made me feel affect the rest of my teaching or the rest of my day. Does that make sense? And again, I want to go back to don't take it personally, especially when we're new teachers. We want to take things personally. We want to think it's because I wasn't ready, or because maybe it was something I said. And while those are things to consider, a lot of times, there's this quote in this great book that I read recently: how they're acting rarely has anything to do with me. How they're acting rarely has anything to do with me. When you can make that shift and realize there is something going on in that student's life, whether it's during my class or outside of class or at home, then you can start to build relationships with that student and really figure out what's going on.
This really will relate to EdTPA, because very specifically there are prompts in EdTPA that ask you, how have you established a respectful classroom environment? What kinds of things? Relates right back to this. So one thing we want to talk about too, go ahead.
Well, I was going to do central focus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
I
what do
jumped
all
in.
these things relate to? What do you think? What is this all focusing back in on?
Being a leader.
Being a leader in the classroom, okay, what else?
Student and teacher relationships.
Student and teacher relationships. Resiliency, I like all of that.
Healthy classroom.
Healthy classroom.
I like that.
Could we also say behavior management? Classroom management?
Classroom culture.
Classroom culture, love it.
I really like that one too.
So this idea that, and what we wanted to try to get across to you today, is that so often we think of classroom or behavior management as like troubleshooting when bad behaviors happen, or poor behaviors happen, or specific steps for discipline. And that's not what it is at all, right? That's a piece of it, but the larger pieces is everything that we've talked about so far, and all of that.
And I would make one proposal. Do you think it has anything to do Still learning. So no, among administrators, there's kind of this old cliche that said, you can be a great classroom manager without being a good instructor, but you cannot be a good instructor without having good classroom management. That's a really true. Yeah, happens all the time. I mean, when you observe hundreds and hundreds of classrooms, you see it all the time.
And Danielson's framework revolves all around student learning. Right? And the relationships we have, how we see ourselves as a co-leader with our students, the resiliency, how you build a school or classroom culture. Okay. We're going to segue into how a part of this really is how you approach your teaching and the way you interact with your students, the way you speak about your students, the way you think about your students, okay? Because if you speak negatively about them, use specific words that reflect poorly on them or their behavior, whether it's just the way you think about them, the way you're speaking to your colleagues, the way that you talk with parents, with your friends, with your other classmates here or with us, it's going to affect you, okay? There is an article in here, in your packet, I think it's the second packet, and the title is, Complaining About Students is Toxic, Here Are 4 Ways to Stop. I mentioned this to my student teachers before they even entered the classroom this year, and I said, we know we're in a teaching crisis, right? The teacher shortage crisis. There's so much negativity built around teaching these days, and so many teachers are unhappy. We want you to be resilient and to navigate the school culture that sometimes can be negative. And what that means is that you need to surround yourself with great mentors. You need to make sure that you talk positively about your students and about your experience. And there are ways to seek out help without speaking poorly about students or about your experience or about your cooperating teacher. So for example, if you're having a conversation and you're asking for help, one thing that you might say is, I really can't stand Rachel. She is just driving me crazy. She can't sit still. She's touching another student. I just don't know what to do. That is different than, hey, I have this student that I'm really concerned about. I'm having a really hard time figuring out why she isn't paying attention in class and why she just doesn't want to do the work. That's different, right? You're seeking for understanding from a caring perspective versus kind of complaining, right? And being negative about that student. The way that I approach talking about students and our profession is that if I'm talking about a student or a parent or a colleague or an administrator, if that person was in the room, would they approve of me speaking about them that way? Especially when we think about our students. Would the parents approve of those students or approve of me talking about their students that way? If not, then I need to reapproach how I'm thinking about their student or about how I'm talking about their student. But I promise you, you're gonna enter in copy rooms, lunchrooms, hallways, classrooms, where there's gonna be the negative talk, okay? You have to do your best to just step back, realize that that's those teachers' prerogative, right? That's their thing, but you don't need to enter into it. You don't need to be like, yeah, I can't believe that happened today, or can you believe that this happened? You're gonna want to, because you're gonna wanna insert yourself and feel a part of it, but that is not being socially just for all your students. And according to this article, it is very toxic to your teacher mind and to how you relate to students.
And if you get to that point in your career as a teacher, and I've seen it, it's a long career, it's a long life, you know. But if you're always an advocate for the kids and always fighting for them, it's the best 35 years you'll spend in your life, it truly is. Kind of a different approach to this whole idea is, if you buy into this dismissive talk and you engage in it, we talk a lot in Knox Ed studies about social justice, right? And about our own privilege. If you engage in that dismissive talk, you really being socially unjust to your students? And aren't you really using your privilege as a teacher to be dismissive of students that you really should be an advocate for? And that's, so, this is probably not anything that you should attack as a student teacher, right?
But how can you think about it? If you're listening to a conversation, you can be like, oh, I forgot to check that email. I need to go do that, right? I do that all the time. That's my lunchroom. That's my lunchroom escape is, oh man, I forgot to email that parent back. Sorry, I hope you guys have a great lunch. I'll see you later. Take all my stuff and go because I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to listen to it because guess what? That's going to eat me away. That was actually one of my biggest concerns going back to the high school classroom this last year after being 4 years away. I knew the drama that I was going to re-enter myself into because I knew my old colleagues, I knew the tensions they were experiencing, I knew how unhappy some of them were, and I didn't want that to bring me down. And so my biggest goal was to stay positive for my colleagues, stay positive for my students, to lift people up, especially those colleagues that are having a hard time, right? Be there for them, but help them through my modeling of always speaking positive about my classroom and my students. Trying to redirect conversations. Like I do that all the time. I just went out to lunch with some of them and they started talking about students and I looked at one of them and I said, so how was your summer? Tell me about your summer. How are your kids? Tell me about your travels. Try to redirect the conversation not around students but around our personal lives instead.
Okay.
Can I just add too, parents go into that too. You can get into this toxic conversation mode of, slamming the parents too. And a lot of our parents are trying the best they can and they don't have a lot of tools and it is just what it is. So it is still our job to bring them in and to try our best and to empower them. That really is our job, just like you empower your students, is to empower them. And then the other thing is that fixed mindset. If we say, these kids, they're just not learning, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, it really isn't a growth mindset because even baby steps are moving forward. Everybody can do that.
Anybody, any thoughts on all that? Had to face it already? Kind of saw some, seen some of this stuff?
I'm sure you have, right?
Yeah?
Right away.
Yeah?
I have like a lot of directly, even not even in the lunchroom to me, like directly a teacher would come up to me and say like, oh, so-and-so is just being so difficult today, and it can be really hard not to.
It can be really hard.
It's like these are people you really respect and are looking for, and there are CTs, and you're like, I don't know how to say something nice.
So listen there, right, though? It's easy to slip into that.
Yeah.
It is so easy and it is a slippery slope. So just work as hard as you can to stay away from the negative.
Because you think about how you perceive those people right now. Okay, I just want you to think about what words come to mind. Don't say them out loud. What words come to mind to describe those people? Do you want to become those teachers next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Okay, what can you do? Now think about what can you do to prevent that from happening? Positive relationships, positive teacher talk, staying away from negativity in our conversations and in your actual teaching. Really consider how the language you use either powers or disempowers your students, is either humanizing or dehumanizing. Okay? And practice that. That's what student teaching is for. Because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's better to make mistakes during student teaching than your first year teacher, when you're all alone in that classroom, because you have someone to back you up and you have all of us to help you. But you're going to make those mistakes, learn from them, and reflect, and change.
If you want to stay in the lunchroom while that's going on, there are some other kinds of things you could say. For example, if somebody talks that way, one of the things that I used to say is, let's say you're talking about Barry. Okay, Barry is doing X, Y, and Z. He gave me some problems at first too, but it was Coach Bradley who told me, and you provide that positive thing about, or he does really well in art, and so if you've got anything where he can use visual, cues to help him remember that, he'll do much better. And then pretty soon, you'll find that that's what people chime in with. Think of it as a problem-solving thing and just read through what that teacher's saying. It's amazing how many of those people will then feel like if you share something, you say, Susanna's not doing very well in my class, but I noticed she's doing really well in your, your music class, your science class, whatever it has to be. Any clues you've got about how I can work with her better? That's a big help, because pretty soon people feel comfortable enough in coaching you.
The difference you make with your most challenging students will be the biggest difference you make. And I just had recently an experience. We said we weren't gonna tell war stories. Sometime asked me to tell you the story about Chris. And, he said, Mr. Essex, I don't believe, I can't believe you remember me. He's 40 years old. I said, Chris, you're in my office all the time. He said, I lived in your office, Mr. Essex. You were a buzz. And I said, obviously, I didn't think I was at the time, but I made it in with Chris. I was like, yeah.
We have 2 minutes left, and I want to tell 2 stories actually, if that's okay. One was from my first year teaching. I had a student who made me just dread that class that he was coming to, because he would really try to engage me in some verbal attacks, and I didn't know how to respond. There were a lot of times that I'd have to send him out of the room or call a dean to come and get him. There was one time he actually got physically aggressive and threw a desk across the room, made me cry. I made sure that I never stopped believing in him, right? I didn't give up on him. My behavior towards him didn't change. I expected the same exact things and even more from him. 2 years later, his senior year, I get a letter from his business teacher. He had to write a letter to someone that's made an impact in his life, in a formal business letter. He wrote it to me because he said that I was the only person that didn't give up on him his sophomore year, that he was dealing with a lot at home, his parents were getting divorced, and that, guess what? Me believing in him kept him on this trajectory of trying to improve. Second story, there was a student that's related to my husband, another one. I had him as a junior. My stomach, he'd be the kid that'd be throwing the pencils and kicking the kids under the table, right? And then I wouldn't know who was doing what. I stayed on top of him. I just said, you need to, I expect respectful behavior. You need to get your work done. Treat him like nobody else, but made sure I tried to redirect behavior. His senior year, I had him. It was my last semester at my school before I went to get my PhD. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's in my class. He's gonna make my last semester just miserable because I just had a really hard time with him before. He was on his best behavior. And when I talked to him, he's like, well, you just never gave up on me. And I realized that I needed to treat my teachers and my peers with respect. Years later, I saw him at a family wedding, and everyone's coming up to me and be like, you're the teacher that's kind of related to him that he just loves. He doesn't stop talking about this one teacher from high school. I'm like, oh my goodness, really? But it's because I never gave up on him, right? Okay. So, last thing I'm gonna leave you with, we got about 30 seconds. See, I planned bell to bell. I planned bell to bell, see? Find your marigold, the one essential rule for new teachers. So the Cult of Pedagogy lady is an awesome woman you can follow on her blog. But she talks about this essential rule for new teachers of finding your marigold. Find someone that is going to lift you up, that you can go to, that is going to help you get through your career, especially as a new teacher, okay? So it talks about your first year of teaching, surround yourself with good people. She talks about the marigold effect. Many experienced gardeners follow a concept called companion planting, placing certain vegetables and plants near each other to improve growth for water-both plants. For example, rose growers plant garlic near their roses because it repels bugs and prevents fungal diseases. Among companion plants, the marigold is one of the best. It protects a wide variety of plants from pests and harmful weeds. You plant a marigold beside most any garden vegetable, that vegetable will grow big and strong and healthy, protected and encouraged by its marigold. Marigolds exist in our schools as well, encouraging, supporting, and nurturing growing teachers on their way to maturity. If you can find at least one marigold in your school and stay close to them, you will grow. Find more than one and you will positively thrive. I promise you that. And then when you become a seasoned teacher, which means you might have just 1 year under your belt and there's a new teacher next door, you need to be this marigold for them. And you band together and you be positive for each other and you lift each other up.
So we will send you the link to this article. It's a great article.
Are we good? We're ready to go forward with your small groups? Do we have anything to,
Yeah, a couple quick things.
one announcement?
So, with your NTPA, really are supposed to have started writing up that draft, that first go through of the context for learning. Talk with your supervisors about that tonight, the progress you've made, and I'll just let supervisors handle that however they want. The other thing, and I think I might have mentioned this a little bit to you before. We are planning an EdTPA workshop for the weeks of the 11th and the 18th of November, before the end of the Knox term. We want everybody to plan on being here then. And if there's problems, if some of you have problems as far as food goes and you're not on the meal plan, all that, we'll pay for your meals. But we want you to be successful in this, and we're even gonna try to figure out a way to have distant student teachers come back and join us as well on this EdTPA workshop. So, just kind of plan that, you know, that submission date is the 21st. I think after the 21st, your time is your own, but up until then, we want you here and working with us on the EdTPA because we believe in you and we want you to make sure that you pass this test. Okay? All right.
Go forth and change the world.
And if you haven't gotten your stop subsidy thing yet, go ahead and feel free to email it to me as a scan or whatever.
What's the date?
What? Oh, yeah, you have by September 18th, you need to have decided on your literacy idea, or for Tatiana, your music, or Natalie for your English, the unit that you're kind of, instruction unit you're planning to do.